Hello and welcome back to another tweaking session here with ETW. I'm going through Resident Evil 2 Remake now, and I think it's a good game to go through on this old-ass laptop, Lenovo Y50, and see how it runs. And if we can get it, as always, to a stable frame rate. Now, on the consoles, this game targets 60 frames per second. I have a hard time believing we'll actually be able to achieve that now. As you can see right now, as always, I'm running at 1080p, maxed out settings, and the game is barely hitting 25 frames per second, usually barely over 20. So, I have a hard time believing that we'll actually hit 60, but let's see what we can do. As always, it starts at max settings, so let's go into the... Now, I'm starting here in this hall, main police hall, first of all, to avoid a lot of spoilers, but on top of that, also because this area is a big wide open area, and it's taxing on the CPU, which will help us figure out where we're limited graphically. So, I'm going to run around in this area for a little bit and tweak it in order to get a stable frame rate just in this place. Then I'll move on, and we will see how it performs elsewhere. But, in the here and now, I'm going to go ahead and tweak some settings here. So, let's see how close to 60 FPS we can actually get by lowering all the settings in the menu here. Let's go with a preset. Let's just go with a preset at performance priority, which should be all settings low, if we're to believe it's prioritizing performance. It's not even all at low. Some are still at medium. Let's just go to all low. Let's just put everything as low as possible. Let's see. Low, nope. Low, no high, low. Bloom off, motion blur off, depth of field off, everything off. Just go chromatic aberration, film noise. I usually turn those off anyway, but yeah. Off, 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 off. Let's go to 50%. Let's see if we can even hit 60 FPS with everything as low as it can possibly go. I kind of have my doubts, but we'll see. Hang on, give it a second. Give it a second. It sometimes takes a second to kind of register the settings. Okay. Oh, I saw it hit 60 there for a second. Hang on. There, it hits 60. It's hitting 60 in the smaller areas, it looks like. Small corridors. But even then, it's still dropping to 58. And again, this is the lowest settings possible. 50% resolution of 1080p. I mean, this doesn't seem like it's gonna cooperate. So, with that said, it looks like we're going to be targeting 30 FPS, pretty much as I suspected. So, let's go ahead and head into some different places here. I'm going to ignore all of the possible spoilers. I'm just kind of... The goal of this is to get a stable frame rate and not really ruin the opening sequences for you. But, I suspect a lot of you have played this by now, given that it's been out a couple of weeks. Oh, look. Okay, so we are hitting 60 FPS a little bit here in the hallways, but it's still pretty variable, which kind of bugs me. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to pause action here, and I'm going to start tweaking the settings here. So let's go back to 100%, and let's go back to those settings that I had picked out already. So I'm going to go to 4 gigabytes because I have a 4 gigabyte GPU. I could probably get away with 6, but I'm going to go with 4. Okay, so this needs to be at 16 for my personal taste. Yours may vary. I'm going to put this to max. Go to shadow high. Shadow cast should always stay on. Contact shadows on. Look at the difference contact shadows makes in that little image down there. It makes a pretty big difference. So the goal obviously is to always leave the visual integrity of the game intact. So if you drop settings and all of a sudden it just looks like a mess and it looks unrecognizable, that's not what we're going for here. We're looking to maintain the visual integrity of the game itself as it was intended by the director, the developer, but we're also looking to maintain a stable frame rate. So that said, I'm going to go again. This is another setting. If you turn them off, look how much you lose there down in the bottom right. It's just it's pretty unfathomable. So I'm going to leave those on. Subsurface scattering on. Not really a huge difference. Again, low medium-ish is where you want to go with the volumetric lighting if possible. Particle lighting, I'm going to put that to high. Ambient occlusion. This is an interesting one because HBAO Plus looks really good, but I found that SSAO gives a decent performance boost, but still looks pretty good. And you can tell down there in the bottom picture the difference in quality. You can see going from HBAO to HDAO, you actually drop a lot of shading there, and it just doesn't look that great. But if you go from HDAO to SSAO, and you look at those two back and forth, SSAO really doesn't. It's not that bad. So I'm going to go with SSAO because I know HBAO looks great, but it is typically kind of a performance hog, and that's kind of what we're wanting to avoid here. So Bloom. Bloom typically does not affect frame rate that much. I'm going to turn it on. Lens flare, motion blur. I like motion blur. Some of you may not. That's up to you. Depth of field, I'm going to turn that on. It's mostly in cutscenes, not actually during the gameplay itself. I'm going to leave lens distortion and film noise off. Personally, I don't really care for those effects, but if you like them because they're part of the original presentation, feel free to turn them on. They're pretty negligible when it comes to actual frame rate. The actual hit to the frame rate. Okay, so now that we've got our settings back to where we had them originally, we are at 1080p again, and you can see now we are right at 30 frames per second. Now I have it set to a variable frame rate, so it's not capped. That means we are topping out at 32 frames per second. So that's really that's not really what we want. Typically, to have a stable frame rate. Let me turn my HUD back on. I'm going to need the crosshairs here. Hang on one second. Let's see. It should be a display on. Okay. So now I should be able to aim at enemies here. But what we want typically is to have about 10% over what our target frame rate is. So say we're targeting 30 frames per second, which in this instance we're going to have to. Unfortunate as may be, we want about 33 frames per second on average. Right now we're hovering around 30. So, and this is in a corridor. So as soon as we get back out into the hall, we know that we're going to drop down to 25 frames per second, and that's not what we want. So really in this corridor, we should be aiming probably for about 40 frames per second or so, because we know when we get back into an open area, the frame rate's going to drop significantly. So I'm going to take this guy out here if I can aim straight. Okay. It takes so many shots to kill a guy in this game. Alright, I'm going to knife him. Get out of here, punk. Alright. I feel like he seems like he's a harmless zombie, right? Because he's still going after snacks in the snack machine as opposed to humans, which, I don't know. I feel kind of bad now. But anyway, so I'm going to go back into the options here. And since we're aiming for a little bit of a higher frame rate because we know it's going to drop again in an open area, I am going to go with resolution because I feel like, I don't know, let me try volumetric lighting first. I feel like if I drop shadows to medium, we may not lose that much. And if I drop volumetric quality to low, again, the Xbox One X version apparently uses volumetric quality at low. And if it's good enough for the X version of this game, I would think it's good enough for us. But as you can see here in this corridor, it really doesn't boost our frame rate much because there's not a lot of volumetric lighting happening. There are shadows happening, but they're only whenever I'm shining the flashlight on something, which is, a very small area all at once. So those two settings in and of themselves are really not giving us that much of a boost in this area. Now, they may give us a bigger boost in an open area like the main hall, but I'm going to go ahead and knock that back up to high, and this is medium just because at the present time, I don't think that those are going to give us a big boost. Now, something that will give us a big boost, though, is resolution. That's sure to give us a big boost. And personally, I'm playing on it's a 15-inch screen that I have. If you're playing on a TV, obviously this is going to hurt your image quality worse than what I'm looking at. But honestly, I feel like you can go down to around 1600 by 900, and most games still pretty much look crisp. It depends on again, the screen you're looking at and the game. But this game in particular still looks pretty good because of the anti-aliasing, because it's so thick. It has, kind of a blur effect anyway. It really does a pretty decent job of smoothing out everything. So having a lower resolution isn't that detrimental to the presentation of this game from what I've found. Let me go bore this up. This guy's going to come back out after me. Okay, so now you can see we're around 40 FPS. Upper 30s, 40 FPS. Let me turn the light on over here. So because we're aiming for 30 FPS... Now, if you like... Let me preface this first. If you like a variable frame rate, here you go. Maybe you have a G-Sync monitor. Perfect, right? You get between 40 and 60 FPS, something like that. You might want to tweak a couple more settings, maybe drop the resolution down to 70% or so, but you'd have your perfect scenario right there. You would be right between that 40 and 60 FPS mark, and I'm sure it would look fantastic. But I don't have a G-Sync monitor, and I am going for a stable frame rate, which means, unfortunately, 30 FPS cap. So for me, if I wanted to right now, I could turn on a 30 FPS cap in the actual game settings. Right here, when you go to frame rate, you can go to 30, 60, or variable. I'm going to go to 30, and suddenly you'll see that the frame rate will not go above the 30 frame per second mark. But if you look at the frame times right there, they're pretty uneven. Unfortunately, they are between 33.3, which is what we want. We want a stable 33.3, but it is fluctuating between 33.3 and, what, 34? I think I saw it, 35. And then it goes down, yeah, there's 36. Then it drops down to, like, 30 for some reason, and 20. It's just not... That frame rate cap inside the game, unfortunately, is just not stable. So it's not really not your best option. Your best option would be to open this program called Rivatuner, which is what I'm using at the current time. That's also the overlay you're seeing with the frame rate on it. But you create a profile such as this. You can see right here it says frame rate limit, and I just type 30. And suddenly, look over here at this graph, and you can see it went from being all kinds of juddery with all these little tiny dips in it to a solid line and a solid 33.3 milliseconds. That's exactly what we want. We just want smoothness. We just want like a nice, consistent experience. Okay, let's move on to the hallway of death. Oh, hey. What's up, guys? Nice to seeing you here. So this hallway is actually a really taxing area for this game. Not sure why specifically, but it is. And you can see we're doing pretty well here. We're still at 30 FPS. And I think it's mostly because we targeted way higher than 30 FPS. Just gonna get back up and... No, maybe not. I'm not buying it. I think he's faking it. Okay, so we just dipped to 29 FPS. But look, we're pretty stable here. I don't see it really becoming a problem. Oh, there's a little bit of a loading hitch. Lights on. Let's see what we got going on here. They were on, apparently. Okay. Must have already grabbed those bullets. First time through. Oh, I just saw it drop to 27, but I think, again, that was a loading hitch. Which you can't really help. That's the problem, is when it's loading an area, it's gonna give you a bit of a problem, but other than that, I think you're fine. So to be honest with you, it seems like we've kind of hit what we were looking for here. I don't think there are a lot of other really, really taxing areas in the game. And I don't want to give too much away again, you know, like just for those who haven't played this yet. I'll go through a couple more areas, but for the most part, we're pretty stable. Hey, what's up, buddy? Don't lose your head. Oh. I still missed him. after a one-liner, trying to look all clever, and then I miss him. Anyway, here are the settings that I've ended up on. I'm obviously in borderless window mode. I would say go down to 1600 by 900 resolution if you do have a Lenovo Y50. But basically 1080p with 80% scaling otherwise. Frame rate 30, I showed you obviously to go into here, go into RTSS if possible, and set a frame rate limit there. The in-game one does not have great consistency when it comes to the frame time. But then I have VSync on, always VSync on for me. Anti-aliasing, if you want, you can go FXAA as well. It's not that big of a performance hit, but I think TAA is fine. Texture quality high, 4 gigabytes. Again, the only difference in quality you'll actually notice is between high, medium, and low. High at all these different other settings is the same actual texture quality. It's just the texture cache. It depends on what your VRAM is on your graphics processor. So that's it. In my case, I have a 4 gigabyte GPU, so I went with 4 gigabytes. Texture filtering, always high for me. Mesh quality max. Shadow quality high. Shadow cache on, always on. Contact shadows always on. Again, you lose a lot of quality if you turn that off. That's kind of out of the question, turning it off to me. Screen space reflections, same thing. You lose a lot of integrity visually whenever you turn that off. I would always leave it on if possible. Subsurface scattering on. Volumetric lighting quality from high. High is a very big performance hog, even on the highest end GPUs. Even on my GTX 1080 at 1440p, it was bringing it down to 53 FPS in the actual main police hall. Whereas when I dropped it to medium, I got a solid 60 across the board. I have it running at medium here. If you drop it to low, it's still not that huge of a drop in quality, and you may get a few more frames. But I went with medium as per these settings. Particle lighting quality high. Ambient occlusion, again, HBAO looks the best. HDAO looks noticeably worse, but SSAO is a nice compromise, and I feel like it's perfectly fine if you're going for performance. Bloom on, lens flare on, motion blur on, depth of field on, lens distortion and film noise both off for me. Again, these 5 right here are pretty much all personal preferences. There's really not much of a performance hit, regardless of what you have on or off here. So, if you like film noise, if you think it looks a little, for example, if you have a low resolution image, if you're running at like 1900p, if you're running at 900p instead of 1080p on a 1080p screen, you might think it looks a little rough. Things like film noise and lens distortion can actually help to mask that a little bit. They can actually they throw filters over the image, and it makes it a little more grainy, a little more rough looking, and it's a little easier on the eyes, so to speak, if you are at a lower resolution on like a 1080 screen or whatever. So you may consider turning those on as well. But for now, this is pretty much where I'm going to leave it. I have achieved a 30 FPS in this first portion of the game. Now, I'm pretty confident that will maintain it. That will be the case throughout the game, because from my experiences, this one hallway over here is one of the most taxing areas in the game for some reason. I'm not even sure why. That's backed up by what Digital Foundry found, and it seems to be like this is a good place to benchmark the performance for the rest of the game. The rest of the game is really not much different when it comes to number of enemies, open areas, etc., etc. So, if you can get this hallway in particular, this one single stretch of floor space here to run decently, you're pretty much set for the rest of the game. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know which settings you ended up choosing. And if you like these videos, like and subscribe. I'm going to be making more in the future. I always find it fascinating to see what new games can do, what older hardware can do with new games. And I think this is a decent mid-range to low-end PC for a lot of people to either have hope for their own setups or to see exactly how unoptimized some newer games are. But with that, check out Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's fantastic. And I will bid you adieu. See you later. Till next time, take care.